everybody in the world.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get back into our second segment of the day here on today's show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you wish to interact with the show a little bit more directly, you can do three things. Go to our website, gsmcspodcast.net, leave a tip or donation there if you don't prefer YouTube, or you can do it through YouTube. Press that $ in the chat box and comment section. You can leave a tip or donation there as well. Or if you just want to write any burning questions, comments, or concerns throughout the show and leave them in my comment section, I'll be glad to read them on air. Love hearing your guys' opinions. Great way to contribute and interact with the show. It just makes it that much better. But without further ado, let us get into our second segment of the day, transitioning from stardom to situm. Some guys you might want to avoid this week. And this week, it is a very clear-cut week in terms of who I think will struggle and who won't, but I made some silly errors here as well in terms of who I selected. And we'll start off with my quarterback position because I picked a guy who isn't going to be starting, or at least not for the rest of the season in my opinion, in Joe Flacco going into a very tough matchup against the Lions. And now I'm kind of scrambling to figure out, which quarterback might struggle this week. Well, the answer is several could, including the player who kind of usurped him as Almighty Finesse enters the chat. Welcome to you, my man. Anthony Richardson could struggle in that game, even though the Lions' defense is getting more and more decimated each week with the loss of Alex Angeloni. I still think he's going to have a rough go of it. You can say that Caleb Williams is going into a very tough divisional matchup against the Vikings defense. As Almighty Finesse said, Shador is a giant. I can't really say and predict the future, but it's looking very much like it, especially if the Giants are going to tank and try and get Shador. I mean, Tommy DeVito, though, he's shown that he's a cult legend there in New York. Maybe he gets the wins necessary to potentially move them out of the number one slot, but I still think Shador is going to be at least going in the top 5, and if it's to the Giants, it's a very exciting prospect for Giants fans. But in terms of quarterbacks that are playing now in the NFL, Tommy DeVito might struggle in this match against the Bucs. I did pick the Bucs defense as one of my favorite starts. But if you want a real long shot player, as Almighty Finesse says, I did talk about the Giants already, my man. But I feel like throughout the show, maybe more Giants talk comes up because they are a team of the moment right now. But in terms of long shot sits at the QE position, how about Lamar Jackson in that Monday night matchup against the Chargers defense that is now the number 1 scoring defense in the league? That is going to be a very, very intriguing matchup Monday night between two teams that I kind of rate very equally in terms of how I view them on paper. I view the Bills and Chiefs as the best teams of the AFC, but then the Chargers, Steelers, and Ravens are all in this weird mix. And this game could determine that, as Almighty Finesse also mentions, should he start DJ Moore or Jawan Jennings? Well, I feel like the answer should be Jennings just because I like him as a late down back and a late down receiver and red zone receiver for the Niners, but I don't really know who's going to play quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. Brock Purdy expects to play, but if not, then who knows what that QB situation will look like. Whereas DJ Moore, again, this is going to be a very tough test for this Bears offense against one of the better defenses in the NFL in terms of coverage and how they disguise certain things. Brian Flores has been very masterful in that. However, I do think that if Purdy plays, Jawan Jennings' upside is much more elevated in that regard than DJ Moore. So I would go with Jawan Jennings, but monitor that situation with Purdy, because if he doesn't play, then it's a whole different ballgame there. As Almighty Finesse says, if DJ Moore goes off, I'm never coming back to this channel. Well, it's up to you, man. If I'm wrong, then you do you, my friend, but it is what it is, and that's just my opinion from how I view these matchups. But in terms of going back to my sits at the running back position, I think Josh Jacobs is a guy who might struggle in that 49ers-Packers matchup. And I feel like, the 49ers defense, yeah, they does not look the same throughout the season. Bosa might not play in this one. But I feel like, in this matchup, the Packers are really looking for vengeance here. I feel like Jordan Love's going to want to go into attack mode right from the opening kickoff. and distribute the wealth to all of his fascinating receivers that he has at disposal. And to that point, Josh Jacobs' touches might diminish a little bit, just because I feel like it's going to be that kind of game. If Purdy doesn't play, the Packers are really going to be foaming at the mouth during this one. However, if Purdy does play, they really want to prove that NFC divisional round game last year could have really gone either way, and they were right there to win it, but they couldn't put it together. This year, they're going to want to do it differently, and it could be to the detriment of one of their best players in Josh Jacobs, just because I feel like, in these kind of matchups, the Packers are really going to look to show what Jordan Love can really do on the offensive side of the football. Yeah, he's thrown a lot of picks this season, but he's still the guy that they believe can really show up for them in big moments. And in this game, if he's going mano-a-mano with Purdy, he's really going to want to bring out his best, and I feel like he will. But then again, someone has to suffer in that offense in terms of touches and target share and what have you. So I feel like it's going to be Josh Jacobs in this one. Then the wide receiver position, it feels a little simple to say this, but I'm sorry, Malik Neighbors fans. I mean, what a rough kind of week it was for Malik Neighbors, from, hearing that his starting quarterback was going to be benched in favor of a guy who many people thought was QB3. And, there was a whole conversation about, well, if the Giants are going to bench Daniel Jones, then why isn't Drew Lock, who's presumably the QB2, starting instead of DeVito? But that's kind of a digression point there. But then, after the release of Daniel Jones, now you're stuck with both DeVito and Lock. So if you're Malik Neighbors, you're really in a frustrating place. And against the Buccaneers defense that's going to be as fresh as ever, like I said, coming after that bye, I really don't see that much hope for Malik Neighbors anymore in that offense. And it's frustrating if you're a Giants fan, because he is the guy who will define this franchise over the next decade or so, because he's that generational of a player for them. He means so much to them. But, if this means a higher draft pick, if this means, like Almighty Finesse suggested, a Shador Sanders or even a Cam Ward, if you go down that route, then there could be excitement again. So maybe, the rest of the season for Malik Neighbors is going to be rough, but this could be even better for fantasy managers down the road, especially perhaps Dynasty League managers down the road, should that mean a better quarterback for the future of the New York Giants. So right now, it's not looking good for Neighbors, but down the road, it could be looking like on the up and up again. Then the tight end position, this one, I'm not necessarily certain many of you have him on your roster, but he is someone who I was kind of excited to see do well in that Munich game against the Giants. Ja'Tavion Sanders, I feel like he's someone who just has not been able to get going for whatever reason in this Panthers offense. And against the Chiefs, it's not necessarily like the Panthers have much of a chance against this roster, although I did say Chuba Hubbard could be a viable option for you in fantasy in terms of that matchup. But for Ja'Tavion Sanders, it's just been a really, really bizarre year. I mean, for the Panthers as a whole as well, even in this kind of rejuvenation period, when they've been winning football games, albeit against lesser competition, it hasn't really been pretty for Ja'Tavion Sanders until that game in Munich when he had those 2 touchdowns. But, what I'm going to be looking for in this matchup, if anything, for the Panthers, is how they establish certain aspects of their offense. Because if, Ja'Tavion Sanders shows up in this game, that's a big positive, because it proves that you're not just too reliant on Hubbard and Leggett in this offense. If you're Bryce Young and Dave Canales, you're reliant on more than the sum of this offense's parts right now, and you're really willing to open up the playbook to other players. And now potentially with Jonathan Brooks in the fold, you're really starting to look like you can put the pieces of the puzzle together there in Carolina to build this offense to what it wants to be. And so Ja'Tavion Sanders potentially this week might go off, because the Chiefs aren't necessarily that good on defense as they may appear, And there certainly are aspects of the Panthers game that could exploit that. But it's all going to come down to, what they want to focus on in their offensive game plan in this one, a game that's going to be very tough for them. So this one kind of feels like it could go either way, and Jatavian Sanders could be a pleasant surprise, but I'm leaning more on the side of caution with him just because I don't know how this Panthers offense is going to look because of all these new pieces that could be exciting for them in this formula. And so that's why I feel like he's going to be a sit here at the tight end position. And then last but not least, I picked two defense and special teams units, and it's no surprise that it's going to be both Arizona and Seattle. I'm really, really hyper-focused on this game being a shootout. I could be completely wrong because both of these defenses have so many positive aspects to them. Seattle coming off its best defensive performance of the season, and the Cardinals over the past 3 weeks before their bye really rounding into form on that side of the football as well. But it just feels like this is one of those games, as Andre, my friend, enters the chat. How are you, my friend? Been a long time. But in this matchup, I feel like, this is primed for a classic NFC West shootout because both of these offenses know what they can do. For Seattle, it's that quick passing game. For the Cardinals, it's that physical ground game combined with Murray can do himself on the ground and through the air with McBride and Harrison. And so it's just going to be a funnel fashion shootout, much to the detriment of these two defenses. So I had to pick both of these defenses as ones that are not necessarily going to be the best options for you. I know a lot of people might be looking at these past performances and saying that it's a sense of optimism for these teams that they put some good defensive performances together, but I feel like, I can't ignore the fantasy prospects of this game, which we'll talk about later, and the fact that these offenses can score and score quickly. And so that's why I feel like this game is not going to be as defensive-minded as maybe some of you might think. But let me know what you think in the comments because all of these sits are up in the air, right? Because I don't really know how these teams are going to come out and what their game plans will be. As Andre also says, one number one goal is to stop James Conner. I feel like that could be the story of the game, and it could be that Seattle simply doesn't do that. I feel like James Conner is going to have a big day, but hopefully, like I said, Geno Smith shows up as well, and it's a classic game that potentially the Hawks can pull out. I'm hoping for that. And we're going to talk about this one a little bit later, but we do have to go take a quick break. On the other side, we transitioned a little bit into the world of college football. Some huge games in Week 13 with playoff stakes and potentially fantasy college football stakes that are bigger than ever. So you don't want to miss this segment right after this short break.
Looking for your daily